What is up, my friend? Welcome. This is episode 37 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. I am Mikey Henninger, the owner, I guess, of Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. And today, live on this YouTube channel or on Facebook or wherever you're tuning in, we're going to talk week 3 fantasy football, including an Ask Me Anything and Ask Mikey Anything session where I'm basically fielding all of your comments in the comment section, or as many of your comments as I possibly can from the comment section in the next hour or so. We're going to talk probably a ton of start sit, who you want in your lineup, who you don't want in your lineup. We're going to talk going forward rankings, to be or not to be, the best chicken wings, whatever. We're going to talk about anything and everything that you bring to the table right here, right now. Episode 37 of Inside the 20 by Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Oh man, I actually don't even want it to be over. I love that. That's a Tanner. Nice job, man. That's a great tune. I actually I don't know which intro song I like better, but that one's pretty sweet. Let me lower my desk here a little bit. Hopefully everybody's having an awesome Friday. Hopefully everybody's got some exciting plans for the weekend. I see the comments are already starting to light up here a little bit. We got Friday Fantasy Football Lunch and Learn with Mikey. Maybe that's what I need to rename the show. Jordan, I know you mentioned that you got a couple questions coming in. Can't wait to see what those look like. GQ is joining in. GQ, man, good to see you. Thanks for popping in here. I know you're obviously usually very busy at work, so I appreciate you taking a few minutes on your Friday. We got Tanner up in the house. Tanner's also behind the curtain. He's backstage right now, if you will, just in case things go wrong, because nobody trusts me with pressing any kind of buttons on any of this stuff. We got me popping in here to say, bring it. I don't know why I clicked that. It's just because it was next. And then Jordan Poggle's coming in and saying garlic parmesan. And I'm guessing he's talking about that's the best wing. Garlic parm is pretty banging. I'm not going to lie, but nothing beats a good buffalo wing. Buffalo wings are where it's at. If you have a good buffalo sauce, you've won the chicken wing game. There's nothing in the world that's better than it. And Jordan is also digging the intro. So nice job, Tanner. We're getting positive feedback there. All right. So if you're ready, feel free to start dropping any and every question that you have in the comment section. This week, I'll be doing a much better job of actually paying attention to it. I already told Tanner backstage that I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable this week with all of the moving parts and moving pieces of everything that's going on. While we are waiting for some of those questions to pop up, I do have a couple questions that we'll talk about on the side here, if they make sense. They actually might make their way into the comment section here today. Oh, see, it took me a while to hide that banging intro comment, but let me pop up, if you're new to it, I'm going to pop up the lineup setting heat map. Looks like Jordan actually already has a question, so maybe this is going to be a good starting spot for the heat map. So Jordan Poggle Mr. Garlic Parmesan wants to know, need a second running back between James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones, or Najee Harris. Full PPR. Okay, so this is going to be tricky, right? Because we have 4 different options, but we can only choose one. Ultimately, that's a good problem to have. I have one of my Yahoo leagues where I have A.J. Brown, Cooper Kupp, and Deebo Samuel. I'm just trying to find a wide receiver that is breathing and able to go on the football field. So ultimately, this is a great problem to have. But let's pop up first of all, here's the first thing I want to do here. Oh, there's no way for me to copy and paste this. Shoot, I wanted to pop it into our Discord server, but whatever. We'll figure that out when we get there. So give me 1 second while I pop up the old heat map. Screen sharing. Yes, I hear you. Let's just do window 1. Window over here. All right. Here we go. All right, y'all. So What you are looking at here is the weekly heat map. This is the tool that launched my entire company after it went viral on Reddit. This is something that I spend 20, sometimes even 30 hours per week creating, basically providing contextual analysis for every single player in every single game, every single week. This is something I do every single week to help you identify players you do want in your lineup and players you don't want in your lineup, whether that's your home leagues, your typical redraft leagues, dynasty, maybe it's DFS, FanDuel, DraftKings, etc. Maybe you're doing some drafts on drafters.com. If you haven't played Drafters, by the way, give it a shot. If you enter promo code BBFF when you're making your first deposit on Drafters, they're going to 100% match your first deposit up to $100. So it's free money to play fantasy football with. Maybe you're doing some, I don't know if I should say the word. Maybe you're looking for parlays, or you're living in a state where gambling is legal, or if you're in Wisconsin and you can drive to Potawatomi and you're looking for some prop bets. Those are all the things that people are using the weekly heat map for. So, for example, Jordan Poggle, who is a Basement Brood fantasy football subscriber, he has access to every single week heat map, but sometimes you just can't quite decide on which player you want to go with. And usually there's two options here. Number one, let me slide this over here real quick. Number one, you can go with the Discord server, which is our online community. It's an online army of, last I checked, there was 197 and counting fantasy football players that are in here helping each other out on a daily basis. I'm trying to show my screen. That's not working. So we're going to go with the heat map. And number two is the heat map. So let's get to Jordan's question here. PPR scoring, we're looking at James Conner, J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones, or Najee Harris. I'm going to go one by one, and I'll try and keep it nice and quick. But sometimes I just need to remind myself of who's doing what. When you're writing about 250 players every week, sometimes it's tough to remember who is doing what or who you even like. That's why I started creating this resource in the first place. All right. So we're looking for James Conner. Okay. So he's on the Cardinals, which is a later game. Lions Cardinals. So 51.5 point over under. Let me pump this up a little bit. I don't know how well you can see this. There we go. 51.5 point over under. Last I checked, that is the highest on the week 2 slate or week 3 slate. And both teams have an implied point total in the green, meaning both teams are expected to be above average scoring teams in week 3. Meaning this game is arguably going to be the shootout worth targeting in week 3 fantasy football lineups. Okay. So if there's one game that you could build a fantasy football lineup around in week 3, this is the one. Lions Cardinals. Okay. So already there's a point in James Conner's favor. Now, the spread itself it's not a good thing that James Conner's Cardinals are underdogs, right? Typically for a running back, if you're an underdog, that means your team could be pressed into pass heavy game script as they're trying to keep up with the opponent. Now, two things. A 3-point spread isn't wide enough to suggest, this doesn't suggest it's going to be a blowout. James Conner should be plenty involved. Cardinals should be able to run the ball as much as they want because the game theoretically should be close. But even if it's not, James Conner has done more than enough in his career and even during his time with the Cardinals to suggest he'll be plenty involved in the passing game. Okay. Now looking quickly at what you see here. Here, let me copy and paste this to bring it down here for a second so you know what we're looking at. These quick little numbers that you see here are showing how each defense performs against each position. So the Detroit Lions currently have the number 32 next to their name underneath running back. That means they are 32nd in the NFL in PPR points allowed to opposing running backs after 2 weeks. In other words, they are literally the best defense as it pertains to limiting running backs. This is a defense that typically you shouldn't feel great about your running back going up against. So that's what we're looking at the team level for the Cardinals and James Conner. But let's look at the individual level here real quick so I can remind myself. Now I have James Conner in column B, the green column. This is a column that typically you feel pretty good about that player being in your lineup. He does have a yellow dot, meaning if he's going in any direction, he's moving closer to column C than he is to column A. And column C is more, I don't feel as great about having him in my lineup as I usually would. So if we want to know exactly how we're feeling about James Conner, you just double click on his name and it's going to tell you basically everything that you need to know. Now the TLDR, the bottom line for James Conner, he's a quality RB2, especially in a high scoring game like this, but there's no denying that this is a tough matchup. Now the things that we love, we've already talked about this. The Lions Cardinals, that's going to be a high scoring game. The things that we like is that the Cardinals they're a part of that high scoring game. They have a nice implied total over 24 points. That's the 8th most among all 32 teams on the week 3 slate. That suggests the Cardinals are going to score touchdowns, and James Conner has a good chance of being involved in those touchdowns. Now, so far, James Conner is doing quite well this season. He's averaging a strong 18 plus PPR points per game. That includes 20 plus touches. Okay. It's hard to find running backs that are getting 20 plus touches per game. He's getting about 2.5 targets per game, 103.5 scrimmage yards, et cetera, et cetera. We're feeling pretty good about James Conner. He scored 17 plus PPR points on 19 touches in week 1, followed by 19 plus points on 22 touches in week 2. We're feeling really good about James Conner up to this point. Now, what we don't feel great about, like we already talked about this, so I won't spend too much time here. James Conner is a 3-point underdog. But like I mentioned, he's done enough in his career to prove that he can be plenty effective in the passing game. Now, what we don't like about James Conner's scenario is after 2 games, we talked about this a little bit, the Detroit Lions are absolutely suffocating running backs. They're holding them to the 6th fewest touches, fewest catches, 5th fewest rushing yards, fewest receiving yards, 2nd fewest scrimmage yards, 12th fewest touchdowns, and the fewest PPR points. Running backs are currently they're getting shy of 11 PPR points per game when they're playing against the Detroit Lions. They have held opposing running backs to the 8th fewest or worse PPR points per game in each of the last 2 seasons. They held running backs to the 2nd fewest PPR points in 2023. So their hot start is no joke. They've been great against running backs for years. This is alarming. This is not great news for James Conner. Kyron Williams played against these Lions in week 1. He did manage 14.4 PPR points, but he needed 21 touches and 3 targets to get there. Thankfully, he scored a touchdown. Otherwise, it wouldn't have even been close. And then Rachaad White scored just 3 PPR points, but he only had 11 touches in week 2 as his week 2 was ruined by injury. Okay. So ultimately, we're feeling slightly optimistic about James Conner, but recognizing that this could be a game where he struggles, at least with efficiency, even if not volume. And volume is what wins championships. Now, having gone through all of that, I won't go through all of that with all 4 of these guys. We'll just kind of go TLDR on all these. I know we have a lot of comments to get to. So let's talk about Aaron Jones for a minute. Now, Aaron Jones, where are you, Aaron Jones? So Aaron Jones is smack dab in column C. Bottom line, he's a volume-based RB2. Difficult matchup in week 3. They're going against the Minnesota Vikings. The things that we don't like about Aaron Jones is that after 2 games, the Texans are doing a really good job against running backs. You can read all of the details here. By the way, if you want access to the weekly heat map, there's 3 different ways that you can get it, all of which are in the description of this episode. So just scroll down. You don't need to see my face or the heat map. You'll see a couple links to get access to the heat map. There's 3 different ways. Number 1, you can purchase the whole season of heat maps. So the remainder of the season, the price is now down to, I believe, $53.99. If you want to, otherwise, you can also pay $19.99 per month, which will give you access to every single heat map, but also our Discord server and the Ask Mikey Anything channel inside that Discord server. Guarantees I will see your question. And option number 3 is if you have commitment issues, A, go to therapy, get that checked out. And B, if you have commitment issues, and you just want to try it, you can just purchase the week 3 heat map, which is what you're looking at right now. That's just $4.99. Okay. So anyways, all 3 of those links are in the description below. But so the Texans are doing a very good job against running backs so far. Jonathan Taylor wasn't able to score 11 PPR points against the Texans. Neither was DeAndre Swift. Both guys handled 16 touches. Texans are doing really well. The other thing that we don't like about Aaron Jones is that the Vikings are underdogs when they're going against the Texans. There's just not really a heck of a lot to love about Aaron Jones. If we're going to go with a running back who who is going in a difficult matchup, I'm personally going to go with James Conner here because we know the volume is going to be there. They're going to ramp up. He's going to be involved in passing down situations. If we don't love Aaron Jones and we're putting him up against James Conner, who also has a difficult matchup, it's James Conner. So Aaron Jones, you're out of this equation. J.K. Dobbins, I almost missed you. So J.K. Dobbins is already my favorite story of 2024. He's obviously doing terrific, right? He's getting 130 plus rushing yards and 1 touchdown. He's getting 20 or more PPR points in both of the games that he started so far. He's doing really well. What else we like? Bijan Robinson scored. We feel okay about this. Bijan Robinson scored 16 plus PPR points, but he needed 23 touches against the Steelers to get there. Javonte Williams scored 11 PPR points on 16 touches. Now, J.K. Dobbins, this is interesting, has played being on the Baltimore Ravens, although he was never really on the field. He played against the Pittsburgh Steelers 3 times in his career, all 3 of which were in 2020 and 2022. He averaged 13 plus PPR points and 16 touches per game. He scored 13 plus points on 16 touches in week 8 of 2020. 18 points on 15 touches in week 14 of 2022, and then 9.3 PPR points on 17 touches in week 17 of 2022. Now, gigantic grain of salt there. That's more than 2 years ago. Okay. So you should definitely take that with a grain of salt. J.K. Dobbins is not the same player. He's on a different team. The Steelers are on a different team, but historically speaking, J.K. Dobbins has done pretty well against the Steelers. And we know Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman want to run the football as much as possible. As J.K. Dobbins is doing terrific to start the year, Gus Edwards is not doing terrific to start the year. That gap could get further and further apart as J.K. Dobbins becomes more and more of a voluminous workhorse for the Chargers moving forward. Now, the things we don't like about this is that the game itself is disgusting, right? You'll see over here a dark red box for the Chargers and Steelers. Says 35.5 is the over-under. That's the lowest on the slate. Neither team is expected to score even 19 points. Okay, so there's not going to be a lot of touchdowns in this football game. So if J.K. Dobbins is going to smash in week 3, it's going to have to be on the back of rushing yards and or catches. Could be hard to come by because the Steelers are doing pretty well against running backs up to this point. 13th fewest touches, 7th fewest yards. You can read this. They haven't allowed a single touchdown to running backs so far this year. Okay. So ultimately, if I have to choose between J.K. Dobbins and the other one was James Conner, we're going with James Conner over J.K. Dobbins because both of those guys, again, have difficult matchups, but James Conner is in a higher scoring game. He has a better chance of scoring a touchdown, and he's going to be more involved in the passing game. J.K. Dobbins is doing all of his damage on the ground. Last but not least, Najee Harris. Okay. We've already talked about the game. The game itself is gross. Theoretically, you don't want a ton of exposure to Chargers Steelers because there's really not going to be a lot of fantasy points there. Now, the Chargers are a better matchup for running backs. They're allowing they have allowed the 10th most or more PPR points per game to opposing running backs in each of the last 3 years. Najee Harris is getting plenty of volume. That's not the question. It's that he's not really doing anything with it when he's getting that volume. He has 39 touches after 2 games, but he's averaging 19.5 touches per game, but he has scored just 8.7 PPR points per game. So until we see, and if we're talking about a game where he's really there's not going to be a lot of scoring, it's hard to get really, really excited about him. So for me, J.K. Dobbins is out, Aaron Jones is out, Najee Harris is out, James Conner is the choice here. And he's the winner. James Conner is the winner. Jordan, hopefully that answers your question. I know that took way too long, but hopefully that helps kind of give you guys a sense of how the heat map works and how it's used here. We got a question from Steven Grise, which I am going to get to in 1 second. But first, if there's any of you out there that might be looking for your next career opportunity, give this a look. Are you a software wizard? A code ninja? A forge master, or maybe even just a mad scientist? Then come build your career ladder with Infinity Labs, an award-winning technology company, best place to work, and business of the year with best-in-class benefits and compensation. Visit i-labs.tech. That's i-labs.tech today, where you can learn more about Infinity Labs, our expanding national presence, and why the status quo has no hold on us. Whew. Man, I needed an excuse to get a drink there. So there we are. All right. Next question is from Mr. Stephen Grise. Hello. Hello, Stephen. Good to meet you. Looking for week 3 advice. Full PPR, need to fill wide receiver and 2 flex spots. Okay, so this one is going to be a beast here. So bear with me, everybody. George Pickens, Najee Harris, Demarcus Robinson, Ladd McConkey, Carson Steele, Rico Dowdle, Chase Brown. Holy criminally, Stephen. This one, that's a lot. Okay, that's a lot we got to figure out here. This is a great example of where I would love an opportunity to share the Discord server. Inside my Discord server, again, it's an online community. It's an online army of fantasy football players. This is exactly the type of question that a lot of people post in the Start Sit channel. It's literally a channel just for questions like this. And everybody that is available weighs in on that conundrum to help you come to an educated decision. When I can, I hop in there and I help out with that as well. But let's use the heat map to figure this one out. So first things first, we're going to talk about George Pickens, okay? Pickens, where you at, sir? All right, we got him in column C. Not feeling too great about that. And again, this is the Pittsburgh Steelers game. We don't love the Pittsburgh Steelers game to begin with. This is just, there's not going to be a lot of touchdowns. The other thing about George Pickens, and I just tweeted about this recently, is this game is a game where we have Arthur Smith going against Greg Roman. And I don't think there are 2 more run-heavy coaches in all of football these days. So Greg Roman is going to run the ball as much as he can. Arthur Smith is going to run the ball as much as he can. There's going to be no throwing in this football game. And that's highly, highly alarming for George Pickens. Here are the things that we hate. We talked about the over-under. We talked about the implied total. I mean, the Steelers are expected to win and not even score 19 points. George Pickens is getting just 5.5 targets per game. That's not enough volume to be considered a safe floor or a consistent type of option. So he is going to need to have big games to be worthy of being in your lineup. And this doesn't look like it's going to be one of those. Chargers are doing a great job against enemy wide receivers. There's a lot of reasons here to not like George Pickens. So we'll move on to the next one, but we're not exactly loving this start for George Pickens. Now, Najee Harris is your next person in here. We talked a little bit about Najee Harris before. I do like Najee more than I like George Pickens, just based on the script of this game, knowing that they're going to run the ball as much as possible. So if we have to choose one or the other between those two, we're going to go with Najee Harris to start with. Then we got Demarcus Robinson. Man, and when I talk about coin tosses, the Los Angeles Chargers are going to be the biggest coin toss on the planet at this stage, right? They lost Cooper Kupp. They lost Puka Nacua. That's basically 20 targets per game that need to find new homes in Matthew Stafford's offense. So there's no denying a gigantic opportunity for Demarcus Robinson. Huge. But it's also a gigantic opportunity for Tyler Johnson and Jordan Whittington, who had a ton of hype towards the end of the preseason. So here's what we have for Demarcus Robinson. On the surface, we got him as a wide receiver 4 flex, but there's upside for a ton more based on potential volume and the week 3 matchup, which we'll get to. Now, for starters, the Rams are 7 point. Here, let me scroll down a little bit here so you can see this better. For starters, the Rams are 7-point underdogs in this game. Now, usually if you're that heavy of an underdog, that puts your team at risk of needing to abandon the run, keep the ball in the air as you're trying to catch up to the other team. So think of it this way. If the 49ers are winning by 2 scores in the second half and the Rams are trying to catch up, more than likely they're not going to be running the ball as much as they are going to be throwing the ball. Okay. So a 7-point spread is typically pretty good for the running back of the favored team. It's bad news for the running back on the underdog. Conversely, it's not great news for the pass catchers on the favored team because that team will be trying to kill the clock. They won't have to throw the ball as much in the second half. And it's great news for the pass catchers on the underdog. Okay, so just something to keep in mind as you consider the spread moving forward. Now, after 2 games, the San Francisco 49ers are getting absolutely smoked by wide receivers. 13th most catches, 6th most yards, 2nd most touchdowns, 4th most PPR points per game. Allen Lazard and Justin Jefferson both scored more than 23 PPR points against the Niners in week 1 and week 2. Garrett Wilson and Jalen Naylor scored 12 PPR points of their own. This isn't necessarily a new trend. The 49ers have allowed the 12th most or more PPR points per game to opposing wide receivers in each of the last 3 seasons. And we already talked about this. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua will both miss time. That frees up 17 or more targets that need to find new homes. Now, the thing to note about Demarcus Robinson is that he's playing more wide receiver. He's playing more offensive snaps than any other wide receiver on the Rams roster, not named Puka Nacua or Cooper Kupp. He played 92% of the offensive snaps in week 2, meaning 92% of the time that Matthew Stafford is on the field, so is Demarcus Robinson, and that's noteworthy. Okay. Tyler Johnson played 87% of the snaps, and Jordan Whittington only played 50%, although it is worth noting that Cooper Kupp played the majority of week 2 before he was forced out of the game with an injury. So we expect Jordan Whittington's snap share to increase pretty dramatically here in week 3. There have been rumors, and so take this with a grain of salt. There have been rumors, and that's just what they are, that Jordan Whittington is probably the closest to a direct replacement for the Cooper Kupp role. But it's important to recognize that Jordan Whittington is not Cooper Kupp. Just because he's playing that role doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be as effective, right? I know we saw Puka Nacua go off last year. It's really fun and exciting to think that we have another Puka Nacua, we have another Cooper Kupp with Jordan Whittington, and he might be great. But as of right now, if I'm forced to choose one, you got to go with Demarcus Robinson because he's playing the majority of the snaps with the Rams. Okay. Now, the things we don't like or don't feel as confident about is that we just don't know. Until we have some data, we don't know what to expect from the Rams. It's a big coin flip. And the other thing is that the Rams have an implied total of just 18.7 points, which is the 9th fewest among all 32 teams on the week 3 slate. That tells us that they're not expected to score a lot of touchdowns, meaning if Demarcus Robinson is going to go off, he's going to need to do it with targets, catches, and receiving yards, likely not touchdowns. Okay. Still, if I'm forced to choose between Pickens, Najee Harris, and Demarcus Robinson, A, I like Najee Harris. B, I like Demarcus Robinson. I really don't care for George Pickens in week 2. Ladd McConkey, it's going to be the exact same thing as George Pickens, except worse. We got him all the way down here in column D. He's in the low scoring game. He's not getting a lot of targets. You never know if it's going to be Quentin Johnson or Josh Palmer or Ladd McConkey. McConkey's not an option in this case. Then you got Carson Steele. Okay. Now, again, a lot like the Rams wide receivers, this whole thing is going to be a gigantic toss-up. We just don't really know what to expect from this until we have more data. Now, what we do like is that the Chiefs have an implied total of about 25 points. That's the 5th most among all 32 teams on the week 3 slate. They're as always, the Chiefs are a good team. They're a good bet to get into your fantasy football lineup, just getting any exposure where you can. Chiefs at Falcons does have a decent over-under, 46.5. That's the 4th highest on the 16-game slate. Now, that does suggest that there's some sneaky shootout potential if the Falcons can exceed expectations just even by a little bit. They're only expected to score 21.7 points here. So if they can exceed expectations, it could turn into a little bit of a shootout. Now, Isaiah Pacheco averaged 19 touches per game in 2023, which included over 3 targets. Now, in the long term, the Chiefs signed Kareem Hunt. He's absolutely a legitimate threat to get meaningful work in this offense moving forward in the long term. In the short term, however, meaning week 3, the expectation is that Carson Steele is going to be the back that the Chiefs go with on first down, second down, and goal short yardage situations such as the goal line. He literally has been listed on their depth chart as a fullback before, and fullbacks typically are only short yardage types of guys. Meanwhile, they have veteran Samaje Perine, who has plenty of experience as a pass catching back. So what we should expect here is Carson Steele on early downs and short yardage situations, and Samaje Perine in passing down situations. That's valuable for Carson Steele, but you definitely should not be expecting him to suddenly be Isaiah Pacheco. That's not what we're going to be getting. That's not what we're going to see in week 3. Ultimately, with Carson Steele, you're hoping and praying that he falls into the end zone. That's really what we're looking for there. Now, the Falcons have allowed opposing running backs so far this year the 11th most touches and the 14th most rushing yards. That's noteworthy because that is where Carson Steele is going to butter his bread. He's not going to do damage in the passing game, more than likely. But all in all, after 2 games, the Falcons are doing a very good job on running backs just in general, including holding them to the 4th fewest PPR points. Najee Harris he didn't even get 9 PPR points. Saquon Barkley did get 15.6 PPR points against the Falcons, but he needed 26 touches to get there. Carson Steele's not going to get 26 touches in week 3. So in other words, the Falcons are giving up production, but only to running backs that have a ton of touches. And again, this is not a new trend. Last year's Falcons held enemy running backs to the 4th fewest PPR points per game. There's just not a lot of reason to feel great about Carson Steele. Again, he's kind of and I might change the TLDR up here. I might change the note to Carson Steele is a touchdown or bust type of flex option in week 3. If he scores a touchdown, he'll hit. And if he doesn't, he probably won't. Whew. All right, Chase Brown. Let's fly over here. I already know where he is. He's in column F, which you can read what that means, how we feel about him. He's just not getting any work. He has 10 total touches after 2 games. Until we see him actually get work, he's not even in the picture. He's not a radar. He's not on the radar. He's absolutely worth a stash. I have him in my streamers and stashes tab over, which you can see over here. Here's a bunch of running backs to pick up before week 3 kicks off, but he's not somebody you can actually put into your lineup. Last but not least, Mr. Rico Dowdle. Rico, I am not feeling good about any Cowboys running backs. Both of them are in the orange column, the feel gross column. Reasons being, after 2 games, Rico Dowdle is averaging a barely relevant 10 touches. 10 touches per game is not enough on a slate where all 32 teams are playing. He's not really doing too much with those. He's scored less than 10 PPR points in both games. And after 2 games, the Ravens are doing a great job against running backs. They did a great job against running backs last year. To me, Rico Dowdle is not an option. Chase Brown is not an option. Ladd McConkey is not an option. So answering this question, finally, I would be if you have to choose a wide receiver, I would be going with DeMarcus Robinson as the wide receiver choice. And then 2 flex spots, I would be going with Najee Harris in the flex, and then Carson Steele and George Pickens. I would be going with Carson Steele and just hoping he falls into the end zone. It's really hard to leave George Pickens on the bench knowing what he's capable of, but he is about as boom bust. He's about as risky. I shouldn't say that, but he's about as risky as it can be in week 3, knowing that there just won't be a lot of passing volume in that game. Now, I will say George Pickens is getting the targets when Justin Fields actually throws the ball. George Pickens is a top read, but ultimately we're looking for touchdowns, and Carson Steele is a better bet at scoring a touchdown than George Pickens is. So hopefully that helps. DeMarcus Robinson, Najee Harris, and George Pickens. And that's Najee Harris, DeMarcus Robinson, and Carson Steele. And that's coming from a guy who, if you know me, I'm usually heavy wide receivers. But in this case, I think it's the 2 running backs and then DeMarcus Robinson. Hope that helps. All right. Next up, we got Mr. Steve Berryman. Need 3 of these. James Conner, who we talked about, Aaron Jones, who we talked about, Jordan Mason, who I would love to talk about. So thank you for asking this question, Steve. And J.K. Dobbins. Again, just a quick reminder, if anybody is interested in the week 3 heat map, use the links that we left for you in the show notes, in the description below. You can get week 3 standalone by itself for just $4.99 if you want to try it out. Otherwise, you can get the whole season for $53.99. Otherwise, you can spend $19.99 per month, get that plus Discord access, plus Ask Mikey Anything access. All right, James Conner, quick recap. We're feeling decent about James Conner. We don't love his matchup. It is a brutal matchup. We know that the Detroit Lions are terrific against running backs. They're terrific against them this year. They were terrific against them last year. It's a brutal matchup, but it is a high-scoring game. James Conner's active in the passing game, which raises your floor and your ceiling. There's optimism for James Conner. We're feeling much less optimistic about Aaron Jones, less optimistic about J.K. Dobbins because of the low-scoring nature of that game. J.K. Dobbins isn't as involved in the passing game as James Conner, but we love Jordan Mason. We love him this week. He is the only player in the You My Boy Blue column, which is the best column. If you're in this column, if you're in the blue column, column A, that means the data suggests that everything is pointing to an explosion week. Like I used to name this column the too good to be true column. because it was just like everything is perfect for going into the week. So, for starters, the Rams are getting absolutely wrecked by running backs to start the season. They're hemorrhaging the third most touches, third most rushing yards, second most rushing touchdowns. Which, by the way, quick pause there. Third most rushing yards and second most rushing touchdowns. That's where Jordan Mason butters his bread. He's not a big threat in the passing game like Christian McCaffrey. He's a rushing specialist. And the Rams are giving up the third most rushing yards, second most rushing touchdowns. Fourth most scrimmage yards, fourth most touchdowns, and fourth most PPR points. They're giving up 30.2 PPR points per game to opposing running backs. Now, that is a surprise because last year's Rams were the best in the business. They held running backs to the fewest PPR points per game. So it's fair to wonder if this 2-game sample size isn't enough. But as of right now, they are bleeding. They are reeling. They are a team to attack with your running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and James Conner, all of those guys scored 16-plus PPR points on 15-plus touches. Jordan Mason is putting in plenty of work this year. He's averaging 25 touches per game with the 49ers. The 49ers have an implied total of nearly 26 points, which is the fourth most among all 32 teams on the slate. Like the Chiefs, they're a team to get into your lineup where you can. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. The 49ers are 7-point favorites. Typically a favored team, especially when they're heavily favored. 7 points is a lot. That's a pretty wide spread. And typically the favored team will be looking to milk the clock in the second half. They'll be looking to drain the clock, run the ball, keep the ball on the ground, don't put it in the air. And Jordan Mason is going to be the direct beneficiary of that. If anything, the concern for Jordan Mason is that the 49ers get so far ahead of the Rams that they rest their starters, and then Isaac Guerrero is the guy killing the clock in the second half. But that's if they get so far ahead of the Rams, then Jordan Mason probably had a good chunk to do with that. So he's that's not something to actually worry about. So we love Jordan Mason. So if I'm choosing 3, give me Jordan Mason for sure. Give me James Conner over Aaron Jones and then J.K. Dobbins. I don't love that the Vikings are underdogs against the Texans. Again, it's a narrow spread, but I don't love it. I don't love that the Chargers are underdogs, and that's an even more narrow spread. I would say that the Vikings are at greater risk of getting spanked by the Texans than the Chargers are at risk of getting spanked by the Steelers, meaning J.K. Dobbins should be involved throughout the entire thing. There's a possibility Aaron Jones is going to need to stay involved in the passing game, and that it'd be helpful to know if this is PPR or not, Steve, but he'll need to stay involved in the passing game to pay off. Let me just really quickly, before I give you a full answer, let me go into Aaron Jones and just remind myself what we're looking at here. Solid over under, some sneaky shootout potential if the Vikings can exceed expectations. Aaron Jones is doing pretty well. He scored nearly 19 points in week 1, but then just 11 points in week 2, 14 touches. Vikings are middle of the pack in terms of their implied total. Texans are doing a great job against running backs. Man, I mean, this one's a really, really tough call. We did see Ty Chandler outproduce Aaron Jones last year, which is not what we're seeing with the Chargers. I'd say for me, if I have to choose 3, I'd feel really good about Jordan Mason. I'd feel fine with James Conner, and I would go with J.K. Dobbins, but I wouldn't feel particularly great about it. But I would go with J.K. Dobbins there. So hopefully that helps. Next up, let me grab a drink of this decaf, okay? This stuff is more exhausting than you guys can imagine. Chubba Hubbard. Or I've actually been educated that it's Chuba. Didn't know that. Chubba Hubbard's way more fun, if you ask me. So I'm going to say it anyway. Chubba Hubbard is available in my league now. I have a terrible running back room with Rachaad White, Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams, and Jaleel McLaughlin. Use my priority to pick up Chuba for Jaleel. So I will say this, Amit, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I am in a couple public Yahoo leagues, paid Yahoo leagues, but they're public leagues, which are 10 teams and 15 roster spots. And in those leagues, one second. Let me just pop it up here real quick. In those leagues, Chubba Hubbard is available in most of them. Or all of them. He's actually available in all three. I'm checking his percentage rostered, and I don't know which platform you're playing on, but I recommend doing this. He's only rostered in 49% of global Yahoo leagues. Okay, so in about half the Yahoo leagues that are out there, Chuba Hubbard is rostered in about half of them. So I would check his whatever platform you're on. I would check what percentage rostered he is. Typically, players that are that low owned, I do not want to use any sort of waiver priority to pick up that player. I would rather just wait till waivers clear and then hopefully add them for free, especially if a guy like Chuba Hubbard is not necessarily going to move the needle for you. Like, adding him to your terrible running back room isn't necessarily going to make it a less terrible running room. Sorry, Derek Devereaux, if you're listening. But, I mean, are you really going to play Chuba over Rachaad White? Probably not. Austin Eckler? Maybe. Javonte Williams? Maybe. Jaleel McLaughlin? Probably. So if you can, the rule of thumb in general, as it pertains to waivers and whether or not you should spend priority, is if you can see that player in your starting lineup, and especially if you can see that player in your starting lineup this week, then they're worth it, right? If they're a player that's going to be in your lineup, then it's worth that priority. But if you're just adding more ornaments to decorate your bench, that's not, like, I'm not saying he's not worth stashing, but I would just wait, hope he clears waivers, and pick him up for free. Ultimately, if I'm putting Chuba Hubbard in my lineup, I wouldn't feel great about it anyway. So I don't know if that helps or not. All right, we got Rebeldes de Boston popping in here. Got Jamar, Justin Jefferson. That's a pretty good start. Rashee Rice, pretty good start. Trey McBride, Jordan Mason, Kenneth Walker, Zach Moss, Jonathan Brooks, and Purdy. Walker and Mason for Jonathan Taylor, Jaden Reed, and Worthy. I think this is a trade question. Okay, so you have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Rashee Rice, Trey McBride. Man, that's looking good. Jordan Mason, Kenneth Walker. So you want to know if you should trade Walker and Mason for Jonathan Taylor. I would not do this. Kenneth Walker and Jordan Mason, and you get Jonathan Taylor, solid. Jaden Reed, solid, especially when, and then Xavier Worthy. I mean, this one ultimately is like the best player in this scenario is Jonathan Taylor. Not necessarily by much while Christian McCaffrey's out. Like, Jordan Mason is a legitimate bona fide RB1, top 10, possibly top 5 while Christian McCaffrey's out. But when he comes back, obviously a whole different story. Kenneth Walker's not going to be out for long, so he's going to return to high-end RB2 value soon. Jaden Reed, I mean, I don't really love either side of this trade. It's very much a coin flip. This is one that I would recommend posting in the trades channel of my Discord server. You can join the Discord server for just $4.99 per month, or $19.99 per month if you want to get the heat maps and the Discord server. I'm totally fine with doing the trade for Jonathan Taylor, Jaden Reed, and Worthy. I mean, you got Jamar Chase, you got Justin Jefferson, you got Rashee Rice. So theoretically, you don't need wide receiver help, whereas running backs, so actually cancel that. Running back is more so where you need the help. So I would just stick with Kenneth Walker and Jordan Mason and let it ride. And if you are going to trade for somebody else, maybe aim even higher than Jonathan Taylor, because like I said, that gap between Mason and Jonathan Taylor is not as big as people think it is. Tanner Dawson won some money off player props with this map. Love to hear it, man. Hopefully you shared that in the wins category of Discord. What do we got here? Mr. Derek Devereaux. So he is listening. If he probably signed out after I mentioned Chuba Hubbard not moving the needle. But how far does Brock Purdy fall if George Kittle ends up sitting? I don't want to talk about this because I'm too excited about George Kittle for him to be allowed to sit. He's not allowed to sit. But, I mean, if you got Brock Purdy going into week 3 without Deebo Samuel, without George Kittle, I mean, ultimately, why am I looking at the Texans? That's not where we want to be. Ultimately, I don't feel particularly strong about Brock Purdy to begin with, because the 49ers should be able to do what they do best and what they want to do, which is run the ball and put it in Jordan Mason's belly. And if now you're taking George Kittle out of that equation, that, if anything, makes them even more run heavy theoretically. So I would say he falls. I would say Brock Purdy falls. not necessarily because he's losing the weapon as much as it's how much of the 49ers really going to pass the ball when they're missing two of their top 3 passing game options. So he definitely falls. I would say he's more of a high-end QB2 than the QB1 that he was last year, if that helps. The Smitty wants to know thoughts on Rams wide receivers, Demarcus Robinson and Jordan Whittington. I won't spend too much time here because we already talked about that. I should probably do a better job of reading comments before I pop them up here. It's a coin flip. It's a gigantic coin flip. Demarcus Robinson, up to this point, has been playing the most offensive snaps with the Rams among all the wide receivers. He played over 90% of the snaps last week. Just a reminder that last year, Demarcus Robinson played very, very well with Matthew Stafford, even when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were both healthy. He averaged over, I think, 12 PPR points, if memory serves. So he'd be my first choice, but don't all 3 of these guys are in the same tier. I want that to be clear. It's not like Demarcus Robinson and then a huge gap at all. It's very much a 3-way coin flip or whatever you want to call it. I have found myself leaning Demarcus Robinson, followed closely by Jordan Whittington, followed closely by Tyler Johnson. Jordan Whittington is reported to be the closest replacement to Cooper Kupp in terms of the role that he plays. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to get the volume that Cooper Kupp gets, but if he's playing the same role, that makes him at least intriguing from a fantasy football standpoint. So I'd go Robinson, Whittington, Johnson, and all 3 of those guys are very close until we have some data we can work with. My man, Victor wants to know, I got Derek Carr on free agent. Derek Carr is one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football right now, which is wild. I have Brock Purdy. What to do, trade or waive one of the quarterbacks? This league has no IR allowed, and I need some tight ends or wide receivers. So assuming this is a 1 quarterback league, Victor, and it's a typical sized league, so 10, 12 teams, 15-ish roster spots, I would drop one of those quarterbacks. I'm very much team 1 quarterback. There's no need to carry more than 1 quarterback, 1 tight end, 1 kicker, 1 defense. If you have that figured out for the week, drop the other one and move on. Brock Purdy is available in not almost no leagues, but he is available in my leagues, which is wild. So he's rostered in 91% of Yahoo leagues, but he's available in both of my Yahoo leagues. So my point is there's a good chance that if you drop Brock, you won't get him back. So keep that in mind long-term. If that's the guy you want, Derek Carr is on a tear right now. He has all the data suggests he'll go off in week 2. He should have another big day. So I would say whichever one you're not going to be using this week, feel free to let the one fly. If there's somebody on waivers that you need to grab at tight end or wide receiver and you have to do it, then it's totally okay to drop one of those guys. There's no need to carry 2 of them. The Smitty says, Purdy about to put up yards either way. I mean, I'm fine with that. I don't have any issues with that. Jordan, thanks, Brosif. No, thank you. Good, sir. Hopefully that made sense. I know that was a big one. Anthony's in the house. What's up, brother? Good to see you here. Thanks for sliding in. Victor hopping back in with Zay Flowers, Jamison Williams, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, pick 2 in a half PPR league. All right. So let's start this thing off with Zay Flowers. Okay. Column B. So feeling pretty good about him just in general. Okay. Confident wide receiver 2 play. What to love? We love the over-under of this game. The Ravens Cowboys has a 47.5 over-under. That's one of the highest on the week 3 slate. Both of the teams, it's the 3rd highest on the week 3 slate, by the way. Both of the teams are sporting top 11 implied totals. Okay. So both the Ravens and the Cowboys are expected to score at least 23 points, which are top 11 among all 32 teams. We love that. That signals a shootout. That means there's going to be plenty of touchdowns, plenty of passing as each team tries to outdo the other team. We love that. We love the way that this game sets up. The game script sets up very well for Zay Flowers. Now, after 2 games, he is becoming an increasingly safe fantasy football investment because he's averaging 10.5 targets. When you're getting that many targets per game, you're going to be a safe floor, high ceiling type of option in an offense like Lamar Jackson's offense. He's getting nearly 17 PPR points per game. He did fine in week 1. He smashed in week 2. Now, the Cowboys are mediocre to this point against wide receivers. There's not anything that's particularly exciting. There's not anything that's particularly daunting about about going against Dallas in week 2 or week 3 as a wide receiver. But we will say that last year, the Cowboys did hold wide receivers to the 6th fewest PPR points per game. So there's reason to believe they'll get it together. They'll stiffen up a little bit. Now, Rashid Shaheed, he dogged the Cowboys for 20 plus PPR points on just 4 targets last week. But on the flip side of that, Chris Olave scored under 13 points on 6 targets. And likewise, in week 1, Amari Cooper failed to reach 4 PPR points, while Jerry Jeudy scored 11.5. But that being said, that might be more of a Cleveland Browns offense thing with Amari Cooper than it is a Dallas Cowboys defense thing. So all in all, we're feeling pretty good about Zay Flowers. He's somebody that I would want to have in my week 3 lineup, and that's why he is in the feel good column. Now, I will say this is all written with a PPR slant. So the fact that your league is a half PPR makes it a little bit more tricky for a guy like Zay Flowers, who we're hoping racks up catches. We're not exactly expecting him to be a gigantic red zone threat, right? That would be Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Derrick Henry. So that the half PPR thing brings his upside down a little bit, but still, all in all, we're feeling pretty good about Zay Flowers. Jamison Williams, I can tell you, I love him. I love everybody in this game this week. Cardinals Lions should be a terrific game. We talked about the over under, right? We're looking at a 51.5 over under, highest on the slate. The Lions have an implied total of over 27 points. That's the most among all 32 teams. Mouthwatering over under, great implied total. The Cardinals are getting smashed by wide receivers, 8th most catches, 10th most yards, 11th most touchdowns, 9th most PPR points. Jamison Williams is doing awesome. He's not just, and this is the most exciting part about Jamison Williams, is that he was long thought to be basically like the next Deshaun Jackson, meaning he's a big play guy, but he's not going to get you consistent numbers. He's not just that. He's averaging 10 targets per game. He's getting a ton of targets, 5 catches, 100 yards per game, 19.4 PPR points. That number will probably come down a bit, but a guy who's averaging 10 targets in an offense that's expected to score more points this week than any other team in football, that's an exciting play in fantasy football. So ultimately, we're feeling really, really, really good about Jamison Williams. He is a touchdown threat, probably more so than Zay Flowers is. Feeling really good about Jamison Williams. Stephon Diggs, ultimately, I can tell you, we're just not feeling as great about him as we are some of these other guys. I mean, the Texans offense is obviously terrific. The Vikings have allowed the 7th most or more PPR points per game to wide receivers in each of the last 4 seasons. The Texans have a strong implied total, 9th most on the 32-team slate. Solid over under, so there's some sneaky shootout potential here. Now, the Vikings are currently pretty mediocre against wide receivers. Holding them, they're allowing the 15th most, but we're doing air quotes, right? 15th most PPR points. That's not really saying much. It's not like it's a dramatically awesome matchup. Deebo Samuel did well last week, 18 PPR points, but Brandon Ayuk and Malik Neighbors came up short of 12 against the Vikings in the last 2 weeks. So ultimately, we're just not feeling as great about Stephon Diggs as we are about these other guys who are getting more targets. They're in a higher scoring game, and they have a higher implied total than the Houston Texans do. Tyreek Hill. I don't even want to talk about Tyreek Hill. And worse than that, I don't even want to talk about Jalen Waddle, who maybe we will at some point. Check this out. Back in 2022, Tyreek Hill played in 4 full games with Skylar Thompson at quarterback, who's going to play quarterback here in week 3. In those 4 games, Tyreek Hill averaged just 11.9 PPR points per game on 8.5 targets. He scored between 13 and 16 PPR points in 3 out of 4 of those games with a quote-unquote high of 15.7 PPR points, right? For most wide receivers, that's great. But for Tyreek Hill, that is a dramatic fall off a cliff from what we're used to seeing from him with Tua Tagovailoa. There's a reason the guy was a top 3 fantasy football pick in 2024. There's just no reason to feel good about Tyreek Hill with Skylar Thompson at quarterback. There's nothing that's especially exciting about his matchup. The Dolphins are expected to score 18.5. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Diggs and Tyreek are out. I'm going with Jamison Williams and Zay Flowers in a half PPR league because those guys are more likely than the other guys to score touchdowns, rack up catches, rack up yards, etc. So hopefully that works. Justin says, come join us. I agree with Justin, guys. If you want access to the heat map, there are 3 links for you in the description or in the show notes below. You can get just the heat map for $4.99. You can get access to all of the heat maps for $53.99. And for $19.99, you can get all of the heat maps, and you can join $19.99 per month. You can get all of the heat maps and join our fantasy football Discord server. There's 197 fantasy football players in there, including myself, that are helping each other dominate. Justin's in there, Victor's in there, Jordan's in there, Tanner's in there. Lots of really good guys. Anthony wants to know, I need a tight end. I have Jake Ferguson, Dallas, tight end, Sunday, 325 Baltimore. First Baltimore. Yeah, man. So definitely pop open the heat map. If you're desperate for a tight end, pop open the streamers and stashes tab. On the left side, there's all the defenses. If you're looking for a defense, grab one of these. Hopefully you're able to grab the New York Jets. I scooped them up and played them in a league yesterday, and they got 20 plus points against Jacoby Brissett. Very nice. We like how that started. Very nice. And then kickers. So I'm working on a current research project for kickers and trying to predict kickers that are going to go off in the upcoming week. Very early on that. So don't take any of this seriously quite yet. But so far, it's looking like teams with an implied total in the 23s and in the 19s are ones that tend to hit more than teams with implied totals of a different number. So keep that in mind. But anyway, if you're looking for a kicker, I got kicker streamer options here. And you said you're looking for a tight end. First and foremost, if Jake Ferguson does not play, Anthony, look at Luke Schoonmaker, his backup. It's very rare for a tight end to come in or a backup tight end to come in and just kind of pick up where the original tight end left off. But last week we saw Luke Schoonmaker have, I think, 6 targets in a top offense. And we know Dak likes to look at his target or his tight end. So give him a look. Hunter Henry pooped the bed yesterday. Dalton Schultz is a touchdown or bust type of tight end. Foster Moreau had a great week 1, didn't have a single target in week 2, but Derek Carr only threw the ball 16 times. He'll probably have to throw up more against a more competitive Eagles offense. So there's plenty of streamer options here for you if you're looking for a tight end. I'd be looking at probably Luke Schoonmaker if he doesn't play, or Foster Moreau, Dalton Schultz. And if you ever want to know why, you always just pop back over to the heat map and read their entry for the week. Hopefully that helps. Colby Parkinson. Colby Parkinson is definitely an option. In fact, I'm glad you said that because he should be up here. I would say he's up here above Hunter Henry because he obviously much bigger target potential with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua out of the way. So he's an option too for sure. Tresner says Whittington, baby. Very well could be right. It could be Whittington season. We might find out. You mean the Rams? I probably said something that meant Rams, probably. Anthony wants to know Taysom Hill. Okay, so Anthony's dropping his tight ends one by one here. So I think it sounds like he's looking at Colby Parkinson versus Taysom. Taysom is the ultimate dice roll. It's like if you feel like rolling the dice, you want to gamble, you want to play upside, it's Taysom for sure. Like, dude, how often do you get tight ends that are getting carries, throwing passes? And given your tight end situation, instead of rolling the dice on somebody like Colby Parkinson, who's no sure thing to do anything, I'd rather just roll the dice on Taysom. If Taysom's an option for you, he's the option. Thanks for this person, you weird, cheap viewers. Yeah, I don't care. All right, who's up? Christian Ingram. I feel like Tutu is going to be the guy. So I was talking with one of my friends about Tutu Atwell a couple days back. And here's the issue with Tutu Atwell. He lost his job last year. Like, he lost his job to a veteran journeyman wide receiver in Demarcus Robinson, and he never got it back. And then this year, he's running as the 6th wide receiver. Cooper Kupp's playing ahead of him. Puka Nacua is playing ahead of him. And then when those guys got hurt, it was Demarcus Robinson playing 90% of the snaps, Tyler Johnson playing 80+% of the snaps, Jordan Whittington playing 50+% of the snaps. Like, say what you will about Tutu Atwell as a talent, but Sean McVay doesn't see him that way. He's buried he's just not getting on the field, and you can't score fantasy points if you're not on the field. So that could change. Like, they could have a change of heart, but up to this point, Atwell's just straight up not even playing. So hopefully that helps shed some light there. Tresner says McConkey and McDonkeys. I don't really know what that means, but yeah, man, sounds good. Where else we at? Jordan wants to know, does someone like Travis Kelce become trade bait at some point, or is he a guy that you just hold and start no matter what? He's the latter. He's a hold and start no matter what. Right now, everybody's panicking about Travis Kelce. So if you tried to trade him, you would be trading him at his lowest value anyway. So if you're going to trade him, wait for him to erupt. It's going to happen at some point, and then consider trading him. But ultimately, I'd be hanging on to Travis Kelce. All right, let's keep it moving. Steven, thank you so much. Really appreciate the detailed review. You're welcome. I hopefully that wasn't too much. Like, it's funny because as I'm doing these things, my brain's internal clock is ticking. It's like, dude, you've been talking about this for 9 minutes or whatever. But man, this is how it works. I'm a big details guy. And this is, by the way, this is how my own brain works as I'm making these decisions in my league. So as I'm trying to decide between 4 guys, that's exactly the process I go through. I read my own heat map and remind myself of how I'm feeling about certain guys, and then I make those decisions. And more often than not, it pays off. All right, here we go. Derek Devereaux. I should have signed out after that Chubba slander, but I'm still here. That's because you love me and I love you back, Derek. Appreciate you, buddy. Jacob Shockley, start Carr or Burrow? Man, this has got to be Joe Burrow week. Like, Derek Carr is going nuts, and I have him very high on the list. Like, Derek Carr is in the green column with a blue dot in week 2, which I never thought would happen. I mean, he balling right now. The Saints have a muscle flexing implied total 26 points. The Saints have an implied point total of 26 points. I don't think anybody except maybe Derek Devereaux, which is fan-based and not data-based. Let me take that back. Derek is very data-based in general, but he's also a Saints fan. So I don't think anybody saw the Saints erupting the way that they are right now. I did do a little bit of digging on Derek Carr. This 2-game stretch it's not necessarily the start of something. It might be the continuation of something he started last week. Over his last 6 games in a New Orleans Saints uniform dating back to last year, Derek Carr is quietly averaging an elite 21.5 fantasy points per game. That includes over 240 passing yards, averaging nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game. Over his last 6, he has 17 passing touchdowns and just 2 2 interceptions. This dude is balling, and it's not just this year. It started at the tail end of last year, and Clint Kubiak, his new offensive coordinator, did not make things worse. The Saints genuinely look like the best offense in all of football right now, which is wild, absolutely wild. Derek Carr scored 15 or more fantasy points in each of his last 6 games with the Saints. He scored 20 or more fantasy points in 5 of the last 6 games with the Saints. Eagles at Saints, we feel good about this game in general, right? They have this high over-under, 49.5. Both teams have above average implied totals, over 23 points. We're feeling really good about the game. This is the type of game that you want to get exposure to with your week 3 fantasy football lineups. The Eagles are getting shredded by quarterbacks. They've allowed the 6th most passing yards, 4th most passing touchdowns, 10th most fantasy points. Jordan Love tagged them for 16 plus in week 1. Kirk Cousins got him for 17 plus in week 2. Last year's Eagles allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. All of the data suggests another big week for Derek Carr. Remember last week, this dude scored 21.82 points in week 2. He threw 16 passes. 16 passes, and he scored 21.8 points. This week, he should throw significantly more, assuming the Eagles can keep the game competitive. The Saints are favored, but it's a very close game. It's a narrow spread, 2.5. He should be throwing the ball a lot against the defense that it looks like he can torch, against a defense that it looks like he can beat. Okay? But Joe Burrow, man, I've been saying for a while, this is Joe Burrow week. I'm glad I reminded myself about Derek Carr, because when I first read this question, I was like, oh, it's Burrow. But now I'm like, ugh, could be Derek Carr. So bottom line, this is a great spot for Joe Burrow. This is like if there's a get right spot, get your stuff together spot for the Bengals, This is it. Okay. So the Washington Commanders are getting torn to shreds by enemy quarterbacks. They're hemorrhaging the 12th most passing yards and the most passing touchdowns. These guys are giving up 3 passing touchdowns every single game. Obviously, it's only 2, but still, they've allowed 6 passing touchdowns in 2 games. They're allowing the most fantasy points, dang near 24 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. And again, this is not something new. Last year's Commanders allowed the most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So we're going on a 19 game stretch now of them allowing just a ton of fantasy points to quarterbacks. Baker Mayfield scored dang near 30 points against him in week 1. Daniel Jones, who was not very good at football in week 1, he scored 18 plus fantasy points in week 2. The Bengals, like the Saints, they have a really nice implied total. They actually have the second highest implied total on the week 3 slate, 27 points. That signals a lot of touchdowns. Could all be passing touchdowns because the Commanders are so bad. Should be plenty in this one. Now, the thing is, obviously, it hasn't been pretty for the Bengals offense in general. Hasn't been pretty for Joe Burrow himself. He did pretty well last week, but still, he feels shaky right now as a fantasy football manager. And the other thing, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, is that the Bengals are nearly 2-score favorites against the Washington Commanders, meaning if they have a big lead going into halftime or in the fourth quarter or whatever, there's a good chance that they take their foot off the gas and just run the ball, run out the clock, and secure the victory in the second half. Whereas Derek Carr is probably going to be throwing all game as that game goes back and forth between the Saints and Eagles. So you never, and I never thought we'd be in a position where we're saying, do we go with Derek Carr or Joe Burrow? That feels like it should be an obvious question, but man, I'm a data guy. I'm a numbers guy. The numbers say Derek Carr. The numbers say Derek Carr. Derek Carr season. Full PPR tight end question from Joe S. Jake Ferguson, Colby Parkinson, or pick up Brenton Strange, Zach Ertz, or Schoonmaker if Ferguson is out. So I don't want to do you the disservice of, I have not caught up yet on Jake Ferguson. Last I heard, he's been practicing, which always makes it much more likely that he'll play. Now, obviously, even if he does play, the concern is whether or not he'll be limited. The concern is whether or not he'll be effective. Let me pop him up here. Ferguson. Okay. Here's what we're thinking about Ferguson. The bottom line, if Jake Ferguson plays, he's a high risk, high reward tight end 1 in a possible shootout and a good looking matchup. Now, if he does not play, then Luke Schoonmaker is instantly an option as a streamer. Here's the thing. If Ferguson is out, I will take Schoonmaker over both Parkinson, Brenton Strange, and Zach Ertz. All 3 of those guys, I would take Schoonmaker out. If he's in, it gets a little bit more dicey because so I follow Dr. Deepak Chona on Twitter. I highly recommend following him if you play fantasy football. He's a medical doctor who plays fantasy football, and he's very good with predicting what to expect from players with injuries, both in terms of how long they'll be out and also how effective they'll be if they play. And he said, Jake Ferguson's dealing with an MCL injury. If he does play, we should expect a production dip of about 10%, if I recall. I should have wrote that in here. But we should expect a dip in production, meaning he just won't be as effective as usual if he plays, not to mention the risk of re-injury. So Jake Ferguson is very, very, if he plays, very shaky. Best case scenario, like ideally what we want to happen is that he's just ruled out, so we don't have to deal with it, and we just roll with Luke Schoonmaker. Now, if he does play, it's between Ferguson, Colby Parkinson, and Brenton Strange and Zach Ertz. So Zach Ertz is not going to be an option here. Brenton Strange got actually plenty of work in Evan Ingram's absence last week. There's some intrigue there because the Jaguars are in a potential shootout with the Bills. The Bills are giving up production to tight ends. But then you got Colby Parkinson, who is just a gigantic unknown. We just don't know what to expect. He could get a ton of targets because there's no Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. He could just stay the same. Like, there's no guarantee he's suddenly going to get this influx of targets. So for me, it's Schoonmaker if Ferguson is out. And if Ferguson plays, look, Colby Parkinson and Brenton Strange and Zach Ertz, those aren't sure bets. I would just roll with Jake Ferguson. All of these guys are going to be risky, and Ferguson is at least the highest upside of that batch. Okay, so either way, I'm going with whatever Cowboys tight end they're trotting out there. All right, I'm going to try and go rapid fire, meaning I'm not going to dig in to the heat map unless I need to remind myself of some of these players. So let's try and go rapid fire here. Again, one last time, I'll mention it. If you want access to the heat map, week 3, which we're looking at here, week 3 is just $4.99. Head over to Patreon. All the links are in the description below. Head on over there, give it a try. You'll know that you want it for the rest of the year, but it's $4.99 just for this week. If you just want to get this year, it's $53.99 and you get all of them for the rest of the season. And last but not least, the best method from what I'm told, the preferred method from what I'm told, is $19.99 per month. Gets you all of the heat maps every month. It gets you access to our Discord server, and it gets you access to the Ask Mikey Anything channel, which is what we're doing right now, but it guarantees I will see your question in Discord. So that's all I'll say about that. But let's try and go rapid fire here. Jahmyr Gibbs, Devon Achane, Bijan, Jordan Mason, pick 3. How do you even have those 4? That's insane. Man, here I said I'm not going to go into the heat map, but I need to at least look at the heat map here. So Bijan Robinson, I'll just go back here. So I don't love that the Falcons are underdogs. Their matchup isn't terrific against the Chiefs, but like, in what world are you benching Bijan Robinson? But then you got Jahmyr Gibbs, who's in this great matchup with the Cardinals in a shootout. Again, this is a game we want exposure to. Jordan Mason is in the blue column, which we talked about. But then you got Devon Achane. To me, the answer is Devon Achane is the one that's out, which is wild, right? You don't really want to leave that kind of upside on your bench. But given that the offense is moving to Skylar Thompson, it's entirely possible that that entire offense takes a step back. And like, everybody and their mom knows that Devon Achane is going to be the offensive engine, and the Dolphins are going to do everything they can to get the ball in his hands. And that's a good thing for fantasy football because it means plenty of volume, but it also means the defense could be zeroed in and keyed in on Devon Achane. So ultimately, I mean, we have an option between a running back on a team that's expected to score 21 plus points in a possible shootout with Bijan Robinson. We got a running back from the highest scoring team in football, expected highest scoring team in football, and and Jordan Mason, who's going to get all of the volume he can possibly handle on a high scoring team. I hate to say it, but Devon Achane is the one that I'm leaving on the bench. But this is an awesome problem to have. All right. Hypersonic wants to know, start Derek Carr or Anthony Richardson. Man, this is wild, right? Because if you ask me before the season kicked off, that's not even an actual question. Anthony Richardson is currently in the B column, headed towards the C column. He's always going to be in play as an every week quarterback one, just thanks to his rushing ability. Colts implied total isn't strong. It's just 22 points. Not bad, but it's not strong. He's Anthony Richardson, we all know he's off to a boom or bust start. I mean, he went nuts in week 1, but then pooped the bed in week 2. Bears at Colts has a mediocre under of just 42.5 points. Neither team is expected to score more than 23. Bears have done pretty well against quarterbacks up to this point. Stroud only scored 14 points against them last week. Honestly, if we're like, Anthony Richardson's going to be the quote-unquote safer play because of his rushing ability, but Derek Carr, in this situation that he is and the way that he's playing and the way that that offense is clicking, I think it's Derek Carr, which is absolutely wild to say. All right. Let's keep it moving here. It's Schoonmaker? Who knew? How do you guys know all this? I was talking to my brother-in-law the other day. I was explaining to him the heat map process and my thought process and the way my brain works and numbers and how everything you'll find in the heat map is numbers. It's data. It's information. It's not like my gut. It's not like I really like Alvin Kamara and I think he's going to do good because he's good at football. It's not that. It's all, everything in here is data to help empower you to make your own decisions. And I was trying to explain this to my brother-in-law at Buffalo Wild Wings last week. And I said to him, I was like, I could literally never watch a football game and be good at fantasy football because it's all data, it's numbers, it's spreadsheets. Like it's me in spreadsheets. And I think what's funny about that though is that sometimes there's guys that I recognize I've never actually seen on TV, like Chubba Hubbard. I can't recall a time where I've been watching the games, and I watch every single game, but I watch Red Zone, but I can't recall like hearing Chubba Hubbard's name. I can't recall hearing Schoonmaker's name. So it's funny. There's plenty of guys out there that I know I pronounce their name wrong. Spoonmakers. All right. Back to rapid fire, if I'm even capable of rapid fire. Connor LaRose wants to know, pick one. Christian Kirk. Man, what is going on there? Zamir White. Ugh. Jerome Ford. Ugh. Jawan Jennings. No. Demarcus Robinson. Yes. Rome Odunze. Rico Dowdle. And then a defense. Okay. All right. Christian Kirk. Jaguars are going to be throwing the ball, trying to keep up with the Bills. Bills have done pretty well just as a defensive unit in general. Jaguars not expected to score a lot of touchdowns. Christian Kirk is just straight up not involved. I saw him dropped in one of my Yahoo leagues, which is wild. That won't be the case forever. At some point, Christian Kirk is going to pop. But it has not been pretty so far. Then you got Zamir White, right? Where are the Raiders at? My brain is mush at this point. Where are the Raiders? Oh, against the Panthers. Oh, yeah. All right. I remember writing this one. I said, if there's okay, let me just pop it up here. Zamir White. Solid RB2 play. And I said, there won't be many weeks that I think Zamir White is a good play in fantasy football, but this is one of them. So the Panthers are getting absolutely smashed by running backs. You can read it here, but they're giving up a ton of touches, rushing yards, scrimmage yards, touchdowns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 6th most PPR points per game. Kamara torched them. Dobbins torched them. The Raiders are 5.5 point home favorites. They're going to have a chance to, that's positive game script. They're going to be able to continue to run the ball. Zamir White is their primary ball carrier. So you have a guy who's going to get plenty of volume going against a defense that can't stop a running back. There's just a lot to like about Zamir White this week, where most weeks, not a fan. So far, I'm going Zamir White over Christian Kirk. I'm going Zamir White over Jerome Ford. Jawan Jennings is not the sexy option that people think he is. He will be a little bit more sexy if George Kittle doesn't play. But I did a little bit of digging for everybody. I did a little bit of digging for everybody this week. In 5 games where Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk played less than 16% of the offensive snaps last year, Jawan Jennings averaged just 4.4 targets and 6.2 PPR points per game. He scored 10 or more points in just 2 of those 5 games with a high, quote unquote, high of 11. And check this out. In 6 career games with Brock Purdy, but without Deebo Samuel, Jawan Jennings is averaging 4 targets and 5.3 PPR points per game. He scored more than 7 points just once in those 6 games with a high of 10.4. Jennings is not an option. He's not the option that people think he is. I do love Demarcus Robinson. We've talked about that. Rome Odunze, he's just not involved enough to be a legitimate option until there's going to be a day where he pops. But until that day, I'm not going to trust him in a fantasy football lineup. Or Rico Dowdle, who's not an option. If it's me, I am going, if you need a safe play that also has some upside, it's Zamir White. It's Zamir White, period. Zamir White would be my choice here. Defense, Bills, Packers, or Raiders? Let's see. We got the Bills towards the bottom of the streamer cheat sheet. We got the Raiders way up there. In fact, they should be even higher. And then, who's the other? Oh, Packers. Packers against the Titans. I'd be going with the Raiders. I'd stack the Raiders with Zamir White in this case, and I'd be going with the Raiders. Panthers have an implied total of just 16.5. Unfortunately, they upgraded at quarterback, going from Bryce Young to Andy Dalton, but I'd be going with the Raiders on defense. All right. Ahmed wants to know, who would you start in your flex, Khalil Shakir or Tyler Johnson? Oh, man. I would say find your shiniest coin, Ahmed, and flip it, because who knows? Ultimately, this is not, I mean, I hate to say it. Either way, I wouldn't feel great about this one. Now, here's what we have for the Bills. We have them as a wide receiver 4/flex. There is some upside thanks to the matchup and possible sliver of possibility of a shootout with the Jaguars. We feel good about the implied total, 25 points. 5th most among all 32 teams. The Bills in general are a team to invest in week 3. The over-under is solid, 45.5 points. That's the 6th best over-under on the slate. There's a sliver of shootout appeal if the Jaguars can just exceed expectations just a little bit, if they get their poop together. The Jaguars are a good matchup for wide receivers. They're allowing the 8th most PPR points. Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle both got them. The Jaguars have been bad. They allowed the 10th most PPR points per game to wide receivers last season. Now, here's the problem, is that Khalil Shakir is averaging just 4 targets per game. 4 catches, 48 yards, 11.9 PPR points, but that's largely because he scored a touchdown. Like, there's nothing here that screams safety about Khalil Shakir. On the flip side, there's nothing that screams safety about Tyler Johnson. It's a tough spot to be in. We just don't know. We don't know about Tyler Johnson or Demarcus Robinson or Jordan Whittington or Colby Parkinson or Kyron Williams. We just don't know. So in this case, the good news is that the Rams are big underdogs, nearly 2-score underdogs, meaning they're going to be throwing the football. And Tyler Johnson is in a great matchup. The 49ers are allowing the 4th most PPR points per game to wide receivers. So again, it's the sort of thing where you're taking possible volume. The Rams will be throwing the ball. Good matchup. Those two things mixed together usually are a good sign for a wide receiver. Meanwhile, you got a good matchup with the Bills going against the Jaguars, 8th most fantasy points per game. And you have a possible sliver of a shootout. You have a higher scoring game, but is Khalil Shakir their red zone threat, or is that more Dalton Kincaid, James Cook? Now, Shakir does have 1 touchdown. This is the ultimate coin flip. Again, this is one where I would love to put in our Discord server, the start sit category of our Discord server, because you're going to have a lot more people providing analysis here. There's 197 fantasy football players in there, some of which are really, really sharp. I mean, we got people who have won thousands of dollars in DFS and betting, etc. If it was me, if this is a PPR league, and even if it's not, I would be closing my eyes, throwing up the Hail Mary, and hoping that it's Tyler Johnson. There's just a better chance of volume, and there's a good matchup. So hopefully that helps, but I'm telling you, like, if you ask me this question again in an hour, I'd probably, like, it could be Khalil Shakir. But I'm usually a guy who wants to aim for maximum upside at the risk of a possible dud, a possible zero. And in this case, that would be Tyler Johnson. So hope that helps. Tough one, though. All right. Let's give it about 2 or 3 more. And then I'm going to get some lunch or something. I'm starving. B-dubs. Yeet. I still don't actually know what yeet means. Otta Baby Eats a Boy is in the house. Love live chats with Mikey. Love having these live chats with you guys. Can't thank you guys enough for being here. Kyle Zaffron says, here for counterintelligence against Otta Baby Eats a Boy. So hopefully Otta Baby Eats a Boy, this is not one of your competitors. And if it is, then Mr. Zaffron, please feel free to ask a question so I can misguide you in favor of Otta Baby Eats a Boy. Unless, of course, you're going to consider joining us. Then I'll give you real advice. All right, here we go. Mr. Otta Baby Eats a Boy does want to know, when do we start to give up? I hope you guys can hear me. I'm seeing a little icon at the top that says my internet is bad, which would be really frustrating. But anyway, Mr. Otta Baby Eats a Boy wants to know, when do we start giving up on Terry McLaurin or Christian Kirk at wide receiver? Not yet. Not yet is the answer. Jaden Daniels is going to get more comfortable as a quarterback. There's no way he's going to continue to run as much as he's running. Like, eventually they have to throw the football. Terry McLaurin is going to be on the other side of that. I wouldn't feel good about him in my fantasy leagues until that actually happens, but don't give up on him in the form of don't give up on him that wasn't me farting, by the way. I was raising my desk. Don't give him up on him in the form of dropping him. Same thing with Christian Kirk. Eventually he's going to pop. All right. I think we're going to call it because I think my internet is crumping out on me. But here, we'll try and give it one more here. Tingley wants to know, Perine or Akers. If Dameon Pierce and Joe Mixon are both out, it's Cam Akers. It's Cam Akers big time. Perine is more of a wait and see. Let's see how involved he is. Cam Akers is an instant RB2 if both Mixon and Dameon Pierce are not playing. All right, y'all. That is, hold on. I think there's one in here that I did not. I want to make sure. JPZ Gaming. Here we go. I wanted to make sure I got this one. I didn't see this. JPZ Gaming wants to know, I traded Lamar Jackson, Michael Pittman, and Lad Conkey for Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. Yeah, I'm more than down with this trade. Joe Burrow, when he's at his best, dude should ball. Like he should eat, he should feast, he should ball. It was the same thing last year, right? If you remember, Joe Burrow got off to a really slow start in 2023, and right as he started to get it going is when the injury occurred. And as Joe Burrow goes, so does Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase is it's only a matter of time before he smashes. It could be this week. Like you could love having the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. You could love having that stack this week. Dude could absolutely ball out. Dude could absolutely smash. Totally fine with that. Pittman, big concern. He's going to be very boom or bust, very up and down, playing with Anthony Richardson. Any wide receiver, and Lad McConkey, any wide receiver that's in a Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman offense is going to be frustrating as heck for fantasy football purposes. I think you took a slight downgrade at quarterback to massively upgrade at running back. You're a winner of that trade. Chef Ran wants to know, thinking about trading Brees and JD. Why do I not know who JD5 is? Is that Jaden Daniels? That's got to be Jaden Daniels. Brees and Jaden Daniels for Patrick Mahomes, Kyron, and Reed. See, wait a minute. I don't know if I'm reading this right. Oh, Kyron. I was thinking Kyler. I was like, why would you get both of those guys? All right, so you would trade away the best player here, which is Brees Hall. So I automatically am not the biggest fan of that. Typically, if I'm in a 2-for-1 type of trade, I want the one because I want the better player, trusting that I can play waivers and improve my team as the season goes on. Jaden Daniels he's going to be up and down as a quarterback in fantasy football. Mahomes is obviously going to come in clutch. Kyron Williams, I was concerned about him coming into the year. I'm not exactly less concerned. Like the Rams offense without Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, it's fair to wonder how effective they'll be in general. Like Kyron Williams should get all of the volume he can handle, but how effective is that offense going to be? I mean, their implied total for this week is just 18.5 points. They're not expected to score a lot of touchdowns, and touchdowns is what we're looking for. And if it's not going to be touchdowns, then it has to be catches. It has to be yards. Now, Kyron is more than capable of catching passes, but there is a significant gap between Brees Hall and Kyron Williams that I don't love that. I do like Jaden Reed, especially when Jordan Love comes back. He's clearly a focal point of their offense. But again, that offense has so many mouths to feed and so many options. I don't want to lose Brees Hall. Brees Hall is the type of guy that wins fantasy football leagues. If you're in a typical size league, so we're talking 10, 12 teams, 15-ish roster spots, you'll be able to manipulate waivers to build around Brees Hall. So hopefully if you're in a deep league, like 14, 16 teams, 18 to 20 bench spots where waivers are slim pickings, then the other side of the trade might make sense because you need that added depth. You need more and more options to be able to turn to. But if you're in a shallow league, likely you'll be able to find some options on the waiver wire. I don't want to trade away Brees Hall. The return is fine, by the way. Like getting Patrick Mahomes, Kyron Williams, and Jaden Reed, that's a pretty dang good return for Brees Hall. But I don't want to trade Brees Hall. Hopefully that helps. All right. Tresner, by the way, Tresner wants you to go with, I don't know if you saw this. Tresner wants you to go with Khalil Shakir instead of Tyler Johnson. So if you want to go that route, go that route. All right. All right. I'll get one last one. This is going to be the last one here. Big Body Bry wants to know Derrick Henry or Josh Jacobs this week. So let's turn back to the heat map and then we're going to wrap this thing up. So Derrick Henry, feeling pretty good about him this week. Here's the things that we love about Derrick Henry in week 3. The Ravens and Cowboys have a strong over-under, 47.5, which is the third highest among all 16 games on the Week 3 slate. Both teams have top 11 implied totals. So what we know is that with dark green over-under and a green shaded implied total for both teams, this game signals shootout. We should be looking at a shootout here between the Ravens and the Cowboys. That's good news. That implies touchdowns, and that's where Derrick Henry butters his bread, is in the end zone. Now, after 2 games, here's also what we love for Derrick Henry. After 2 games, the Dallas Cowboys are the worst team in football when it comes to defending running backs. They're getting pummeled for the 14th most touches, 11th most catches, 13th most rushing yards, most rushing touchdowns, which should be music to the ears of Derrick Henry managers, 3rd most receiving yards, 2nd most receiving touchdowns, 8th most scrimmage yards, and most scrimmage touchdowns. And they're allowing 2.5 touchdowns per game to running backs, which is wild. And then, of course, Alvin Kamara scored 4 touchdowns against them last week, so those numbers are skewed, but that's not a bad thing for Derrick Henry, that if Alvin Kamara scored 4 touchdowns, why can't Derrick Henry do it, right? And the most PPR points per game. Now, Jerome Ford was able to score nearly 19 points on these guys in week 1. Alvin Kamara wrecked them for 44 points last week. The Ravens themselves, they have a strong implied total, 24.5 points, 7th most among all running backs. And Derrick Henry himself, he's not off to the hottest start, but all in all, the data suggests this is a really, really good spot for Derrick Henry, assuming the Baltimore Ravens stay competitive and stay with the Dallas Cowboys. I'd feel really, really good about having Derrick Henry in my week 3 lineup. Okay. Josh Jacobs. Now here's a guy that I was straight up wrong about last week. Big time. Josh Jacobs, volume-based RB2, but he does have a really, really difficult matchup in week 3. Now in his first game without Jordan Love last week, they force-fed him. Like, he was very clearly the offensive engine, the offensive focal point. Every reason to just give him the ball as much as possible. He had 32 touches, all of which were carries. And they're going to continue to put the ball in his belly as many times as they possibly can, as long as the game is competitive, which it should be. The spread is only 2.5. The Packers are underdogs, but it's a 2.5 point spread. That signals a close game where Josh Jacobs should get to stay involved as a ball carrier throughout. Now, he does have yet to score a touchdown in green and yellow. He also has yet to score a receiving touchdown in his career. Just a fun little fact about Josh Jacobs. He's never scored a touchdown on a catch. Now, after 2 games, the Titans are up and down against running backs. On the one hand, they're holding enemy running backs to the 7th fewest touches, 8th fewest rushing yards, and 10th fewest scrimmage yards. Okay, so that's noteworthy because A, Josh Jacobs isn't scoring touchdowns. B, the Packers have an implied total of just 17.5, so they as a team are not expected to score very many touchdowns. And the Titans aren't allowing a lot of rushing yards to running backs. Okay, so it's a tough spot for Josh Jacobs to be in. But on the other hand, they are allowing the 16th most, quote unquote, most RB catches, 10th most receiving yards, 4th most receiving touchdowns, and 12th most PPR points per game. But again, all of Josh Jacobs' touches last week came on the ground. The Packers do not want to throw the ball with Malik Willis. Jordan Love has a chance to play, which could certainly change things. I don't think he will. Now, the other things, what we don't like about Josh Jacobs this week, the Packers and Titans have a nauseating over-under. It's just 36.5 points. I think it came up. Yeah, it came up to 37.5, but still, it's the second lowest over-under on the full slate. There's not going to be a lot of touchdowns. There's no reason to expect a ton of fantasy football points. We talked about the Packers implied total, 17 points. And the matchup we talked a little bit about, but the Titans have been really, really, really tough on running backs for years now. They have held opposing running backs to the 5th fewest or worse PPR points per game in each of the last 3 seasons. Okay, so in 2023, 2022, and 2021, the Titans held enemy running backs to the 5th fewest or worse PPR points per game. The Titans are holding opposing running backs to the 8th fewest rushing yards and just 3.9 yards per carry, which is noteworthy considering Josh Jacobs didn't have a single target despite 32 touches in week 2. So all in all, if I have to choose one or the other, I'm not feeling especially warm and fuzzy about Josh Jacobs in week 2, but I'm feeling really strongly about Derrick Henry just based on the data and the way that things set up for him. I'd be going Derrick Henry here. and it feels it's not particularly close. I'm totally fine with that decision. All right. I'm going to hop off here. If you want access to this heat map, you can get the week 3 heat map for $4.99 using the links that we left for you in the description, in the show notes below. You can get the whole season of heat maps for $53.99. There's a link for that. And you can, for $19.99 per month, you can get all of the heat maps every single month, as well as access to our fantasy football Discord server. It's got 197 other fantasy football players in there just helping each other wreck fantasy football leagues, DFS, betting if you're in a state that allows it, etc. So check out the links that are in the description below. I would love to see you in the Discord server. That's going to do it. I'm exhausted. I am ready for beer number 1 on this Friday. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I'm going to be back next Friday. Same time, same place, every Friday, noon Central. I will be right here on the YouTube channel live doing exactly what we did today. Start sit questions, trade questions, whatever's on your mind. I didn't get any chicken wing questions or life questions. Sad. It was all fantasy football focused, but we'll be back next week. Join me then. I will see you on the fantasy football field. Cheers. This brew's for you.